In my last video, I talked a little bit about how Shadow the Hedgehog, a game that was universally panned when it came out, is a game that I not only like, but is one of my favorite Sonic games. I could make a video going into detail on why I like this game and why I think most of the bashing it's subject to, especially from big gaming YouTubers, is a little unfair, but instead of doing that, I'm just going to recommend a few videos that show this game in a more positive light. But among the haters, one of the most common things this game is bashed for is the fact that it includes guns, which is actually totally valid, and I completely agree. I mean, we all know Sonic is a very lighthearted and cartoony fantasy series with nothing but bright and colorful graphics, and guns are just completely out of place. And why would Sega feel the need to ruin their gameplay with something as ridiculous as usable firearms? I mean, what's next? Developers making Pokemon-inspired games that heavily feature and use guns? Now that would be the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Shadow the Hedgehog gets criticized a lot for the fact that it has guns, but nobody ever actually criticizes the gunplay itself, which is probably because the gunplay is actually implemented pretty well, and it's one of my favorite things about this game. It adds a whole new level of variety to the already solid gameplay formula that was established in Sonic Adventure, Adventure 2, and Heroes. Enemies now have a lot more health and are a lot more numerous, but weapons have been added to help with just that. And then, you can pick up more weapons off of the enemies you kill this way and keep resupplying until you get close to the end, where you have hundreds of rounds and you can just unload into everything while skating through the stage at high speeds. And that is what makes this game so much fun to me. And they put way more effort into the weapons than they needed to. I mean, just look at all this. This game has more guns than most first-person shooters, even at the time. And this was 2005, back when developers and publishers actually gave a crap about putting content into their games. Seeing as how I'm probably somewhere in the top 10 biggest apologists for this game on YouTube, I've decided to rank all of this game's weapons in a tiermaker tier list. Now, since this is a Sonic tier list, I think it's only fitting that we use an A through E ranking system like the games use. But I'm also adding the S tier because there is one weapon in this game that I think is just that good. And we're going to be ranking all of the weapons in this game primarily based on how useful they are, but I will be factoring in some of my own personal biases, like how much I personally enjoy using them, along with how cool they look and sound. And I think that's okay because this is my tier list. If you want to make your own, there's a link down below in the description. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. The Shadow Rifle is going at the very top, above A in the S tier. S for Shadow Rifle. I pretty much made this tier specifically for this gun because it is no contest. This is the best gun in the game. It holds 20 rounds and it kills every single enemy in the game in one hit, with the exception of the Artificial Chaos. You do only get it after beating the true ending, but even after that, you still have a lot of the game left that you can use it on. You can use it when replaying stages to complete missions you may not have done. In fact, it's really helpful for those missions that require you to destroy vehicles like Lethal Highway and Air Fleet, because it can melt those vehicles in just a few shots. It's perfect for getting A ranks, and you can also bring it with you in Expert mode. It also just looks cool. I mean, even though it's called the Shadow Rifle, it vaguely resembles the Desert Eagle. It also has Shadow's little logo thingy on it, and the sound it makes when you fire is pretty awesome. And yeah, this is just an ideal weapon for almost any situation. Now let's get to the weapons whose placements we actually need to think about, and we'll start with the pistol, which is just your basic 10-shot semi-automatic handgun. You fire it 10 times and then you run out. That's it until you pick up another one, or a better weapon. Yeah, there's really no reason to use this weapon in any stage after Westopolis. In fact, it's debatable if there's even a reason to use it there, because there you can still get better weapons like the MP5 and the Alien Pistol and SMG pretty easily. One thing that's kinda cool is that if you hold B or square on PS2 or X on Xbox, the weapon will still be raised after firing and you can hold it in front of your face, which, from Shadow's perspective, probably looks like something from a first-person shooter, which is kinda cool. And then of course there's this weapon's presence in all the promotional material of Shadow. Although, are these even the same gun? The one in the artwork looks like the M1911, but the one in the game looks like the HK USP. And while I'm at it, where's the gun that Shadow is holding on the cover? We never see that in the game. Now, the light shot functions almost identically, and I'm going to put it in the same tier. It has a bit more range and holds twice as much ammo, but it's nowhere near as common as the human pistol, or even the alien SMG. Like, even though it's a better weapon, there's even less reason to use this thing. Also, unlike the human pistol, this one technically is fully automatic. If you hold the fire button, it'll keep firing, but at an extremely slow rate. And really, you're better off just tapping B yourself. I will say, I love how it resembles the stereotypical alien ray gun that you see in old sci-fi movies, and it sounds cool when it fires, but that's not reason enough to use this weapon, so I'm putting it in the D tier. Now let's move on to... let's do the flash shot, the alien SMG, which is the most common alien weapon in the game, and it's honestly a pretty alright one. You can find it easily in pretty much every stage where black-armed soldiers appear, including Westopolis, in case you needed another reason not to use the weaker weapons in that stage. It has 20 rounds, full auto-fire with a fast fire rate. It is a little on the weaker side, but it's still great for gunning down enemies quickly. And much like the other alien weapons, it has a neat design with a cool cartoony sci-fi firing sound. In fact, this is probably one of my favorite designs of the alien weapons. I mean, the two-pronged design makes it look like some kind of biological electric weapon. Honestly, it looks like something from Halo, which I'm sure had a lot of influence on the weapons in this game and just the black arms in general. It's a good weapon that just looks and sounds cool, so this is an easy B-tier weapon. Also in this tier is going to be the MP5, which also pretty much functions identically to its alien counterpart, so it's going right next to the flash shot. It has the same ammo count, the same damage output, a similar fire rate. Which one is better to use really just depends on which mission you're going for, and how much you care about friendly fire. I also can't talk about this gun without talking about the way Shadow pumps it in the opening, but what's even crazier is that in real life there actually is a similar looking gun that's pump action and pumped like this, the Troy 223, except this thing was released in 2014, 9 years after this game came out, so this game very well may have inspired a real life gun, and that is just insane. Speaking of rifles, next we have the AR-15, which I'm pretty sure is actually supposed to be based on the M16 or the M4A1, because it's fully automatic, as in it fires consecutively when you hold the B button, which is what fully automatic means, and it actually fires faster than most machine guns in this game. But I call it the AR-15 because the official name for it in the game is the semi-automatic rifle. So, whoever named it this clearly didn't know much about guns. It was probably the same guy that wrote in Shadow pumping his MP5 in the opening. Or maybe it was this guy.
If I wanted to fire this on full semi-automatic, all I do is keep firing. Now, I won't probably hit the target when I do this.
But as far as this game about a 3-foot-tall mutant hedgehog wielding guns is concerned, this is a really good weapon. One of the best in the game, in fact, and an easy contender for the A tier. I mean, this weapon is extremely common in stages with gun robots. It deals 2 homing attacks worth of damage, which is enough to kill egg pawns, black-armed soldiers, and most gun soldiers and robots in a single hit, and it holds 30 rounds. As I also said, it has a fast fire rate, but given how powerful it is, it almost doesn't even matter, but it does help with taking down tougher enemies as well. And again, given how common it is, it's easy to hoard up on ammo as long as you don't waste your shots. And I also can't forget how easy this thing makes the fight against Black Doom and Lost Impact. So yeah, this is easily an A tier weapon. And speaking of fully automatic weapons, up next is the M60, or heavy machine gun as the game calls it, which holds the same amount of ammo and is one of the strongest in the game. Any stage where you find the semi-automatic rifle, you can find about an equal number of enemies that use this thing. But I'm actually going to be putting it in the same tier because while it is stronger dealing 3 homing attacks worth of damage, it has a lower fire rate than AR-15. This could be seen as a good thing if you're a little too trigger happy and you're trying to conserve ammo, but it's just not a good enough trade in my book, especially when you consider that most of the enemies in this game are going to go down in a single shot from it anyway, and the extra damage isn't enough to make a difference in how many shots it takes to kill most of the tougher enemies. But it does make a difference with a few enemies, like the sandworms and the Black Hawks. the biggest advantage with this weapon is that in some stages there are these turrets that allow you to shoot from a first-person perspective using this weapon. Yeah, imagine going back to the early 90s and telling a Sonic fan that this is what the series is going to be in 10 years. But regardless, it's still a great weapon, just not as good as the semi-auto rifle in my opinion, so it's going to go right next to it in the same tier. Alright, what else do we got? I'm doing this by category, and I'm still on conventional weapons, so yeah, we might as well do the Gatling gun, which isn't the best weapon, but it is my personal favorite, and honestly, I was gonna put this thing in A, but I'm actually gonna violate the Shadow Rifle's personal space and put this gun in the S tier as well. I mean, how can I not? It has a crazy fast fire rate, it looks and sounds awesome, it's tied in power with the heavy machine gun, and it holds 40 rounds, more than any other weapon in the game, making it, in some cases, arguably better than the Shadow Rifle. It's only dropped by Bigfoots, which are hard to kill, but it's more than worth it, because with this thing, killing enemies, no matter how powerful, becomes a cinch. And in any stage with Bigfoots, there's bound to be a lot of them. So with this weapon, you can just keep on killing them and collecting more and more ammo and becoming more and more powerful. I also just love how this thing is twice as big as Shadow is. It probably weighs much more than he does too, but it does not impede him at all, which really just puts into perspective how powerful Shadow truly is. And this is a must-have weapon for any stage you can get it in. I apologize to the friends and family of all the Bigfoot pilots I've killed in my mini playthroughs of this game, but if I see one of you guys, regardless of which mission I'm on, I'm gonna have to kill you for this weapon, and I'm also gonna have to kill your friends for more ammo. We're getting close to being done with this category, so how about I go from one of my personal favorite weapons to another one, the ring shot, which is still one of my favorites despite not being super amazing. Of course, it's still good, but there are just generally better options. But this weapon is just so cool and so much fun to use. It shoots these slow-traveling rings that damage enemies inside them, doing 2 homing attacks worth, and I just love firing this thing in bursts and watching the rings slowly move toward the enemies, and then seeing them melt when they hit. It's also the only weapon where your momentum will influence the speed of your shots, which is pretty cool. And it's one of the few alien weapons that doesn't have a human counterpart, which really makes it stand out even more. And it also looks like the Needler from Halo, which is definitely a bonus. I should mention though that sometimes the wideness of the projectiles can be a negative. Like, sometimes you may be trying to hit an enemy, but it will make contact with the corner of a box or a shield or something and won't make it to the target. That's the only reason it's not higher, but it's still a very good weapon and an incredibly fun one to use, and it's pretty much always my weapon of choice every time I replay Sky Troops, and it definitely earns its spot in the B tier. We haven't done any Eggman weapons yet, so we'll do the Egg Gun. Now, I'm just gonna say it, generally, Eggman's weapons are kinda garbage. I mean, there are only 3 of them, and they're all some of the weakest in their category, with the exception of the Egg Bazooka, which I'll get to later. The Egg Gun does 1 homing attack's worth of damage, same as the pistol and the light shot, but I'm putting this one a tier above those because in any Eggman stage, this gun is all over the place. In fact, in stages with nothing but Eggman robots, this is kinda your only option. It's weak, but if you want a regular ballistic weapon, you're gonna have to use this whether you like it or not. It'll serve its purpose too, because the strongest Eggman enemies are the fake shadows that go down in 4 hits from these things. So it's kind of it's not the best weapon, but it's what you got situation. And also, I just love how different it looks from the other weapons. I mean, it's even more cartoony than most of the alien weapons. Kind of a subtle reminder that this is indeed a Sonic game, despite what detractors would have you think. And the fact that they can be picked up by anyone and possibly used against Eggman makes you wonder why he didn't just build the guns into the robots like he did for the E-series. But that's also a very Eggman move now that I think about it. Okay, there's one more gun left in this category, the Heavy Shot, which I honestly forget this weapon exists half the time. I mean, it's the alien counterpart to the heavy machine gun, and it's a great weapon, it's just so rare. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only stages I've seen this weapon in are Final Haunt and The Last Way. But man, it'd be a disservice to say that this wasn't a great weapon. I mean, like many of the other Black Arms weapons, it has this distinct design, but unlike the rest of those that have more of a laser sound effect, this one sounds more punchy. It's almost like with every shot, pressure is being built up in the barrel before it fires. However, it's also not quite as strong as the heavy machine gun, but given its limited availability, the heavy machine gun probably isn't going to be available in any stages that you can get this thing in. It's a good gun and fun to use, but its limited availability prevents it from being an A with the other machine guns, so I'm going to be putting it in B. Okay, now we move on to melee weapons, and I don't think I need to explain to anyone that's played this game why melee weapons in Shadow the Hedgehog suck balls. First of all, there's the obvious complete lack of range that you get with a projectile weapon, but you'd think that maybe they'd make up for this with damage and usability, but they don't. In fact, the most common melee weapon that you see, the Black Sword, you get 6 swings with it before it breaks. Now, it does look cool and is pretty common and deals 2 homing attacks worth of damage, and there are some Black Oaks that block projectiles, so this could be useful for taking down those. I don't want to say it's completely useless, but there's not much reason to use it other than for the fact that it looks cool. And while I'm at it, the Black Hammer is also going in this tier. This melee weapon is used by the late game Black Oaks, the same ones that block bullets that I just talked about. They're a bit stronger and a bit more durable, but I still don't think that's enough reason to use them. Especially given the fact that in these stages, you'll be seeing more and more powerful weapons, some of which we've already talked about, and more of which we will be talking about. These weapons both belong in the D tier. Now, the rest of the melee weapons, the environmental objects, and the egg lances, these things belong in the E tier. I mean, what else is there to say? It's the same deal as the others, only these are weaker. They only deal 1 homing attack's worth of damage. So why not just use the homing attack? If it's better to use one of your base attacks than it is to use a weapon that you pick up for the purpose of making you more powerful, it's probably not a very good weapon. I'll at least say it is kind of cool that every stage has its own variant of the environmental object. My favorite is the street sign, which Shadow was using as a weapon before it was cool, but it's still a crappy weapon. And if you're wondering why I have all the environmental objects bundled together except for the torches and Cryptic Castle, this is because I was actually going to put these in D tier because they're necessary to complete the Dark mission for that stage. But when I went back to record footage, I actually found out that these things are even weaker, doing only as much damage as your basic Dinky Punch, the weakest of any weapon in the game. However, I still wouldn't say it's the worst. That honor goes to the Survival Knife. Just look at this thing! It deals a single homing attack's worth of damage, but it has absolutely abysmal range. It's just barely more than the basic attack. And just like the sword, it can only be used 6 times, and it only appears in the Doom. And it doesn't even look cool. It's just a lame, realistic combat knife. Just don't use it. And I actually forgot that there is one more melee weapon, the unlockable Samurai Blade, which is the only semi-decent melee weapon in this game. For one thing, it's pretty powerful, but theoretically, it's the only weapon that can actually be used an unlimited amount of times. When swung, it shoots out this shockwave that travels a short distance and damages enemies in front. But if it hits, it doesn't wear the weapon down. So if your spacing is good enough, you can kill enemies with just this and never have to worry about running out of ammo. Now, I was considering putting this weapon in the B tier, but with this being a melee weapon, it does have some other drawbacks, like you can't carry it with you when driving vehicles, and the shockwave only hits when it feels like it. It's not a weapon I recommend using, but it is the best melee weapon in the game, so that's at least something. Next, I might as well get the laser guns out of the way, since this is the smallest category of weapons in the game besides vacuums, and I'll start with the most common one, the refractor. This is the weapon used by those teleporting aliens that you see in the later alien stages, and because of how common those enemies are, this is usually my weapon of choice in those stages. It's decently powerful and also has this effect where the bullets can hit multiple enemies, but they have to be really close together and their positioning has to be perfect, and even then it only works so often. Still, while not the most powerful, this is a great weapon to take with you through the stage, save up ammo, and use to effortlessly gun down all the enemies you see. I'm putting it in B. Now we have the human variant, the laser rifle, and I'm actually going to put this thing a tier lower in C. It has the same ammo count, but it's much rarer. In fact, I've only ever actually used this weapon in Black Comet, and I almost always run out of ammo with it before finding more. Also, its shots travel slower, and given that it's a laser gun, it's supposed to have some kind of effect that can hit multiple enemies at once, but I've never seen this happen a single time. The bullets always vanish when they make contact, and if that wasn't enough of a nerf, it's the weakest of all guns in its category, only dealing the equivalent of 1 homing attack and 1 punch, a full homing attack less than the refractor. Now, I almost put this thing in the D tier, but it still has an awesome firing sound effect, and while not a real weapon, it does resemble the WA-2000, which is one of my favorite weapons in Call of Duty. So, it's an okay-ish weapon, but it's really only worth using for the novelty. Now, there is one other alien laser gun, the Splitter, and I'm gonna put this thing in B. This is another one of my favorite alien weapons, and it's honestly my favorite of the laser category, though I really only use it in Airfleet where there are better weapons, but I don't know what it is about this weapon, it just feels really good to use. Like, it shoots out this cutter thing, it just comes out really fast, like, and I like to imagine that it slices the enemies in half. Even if that is something they can't show in an E10 rated game, but its bullets also go right through targets. It's extremely unlikely to hit multiple enemies unless you carefully line up your shots, but even without that, it's still a great weapon, and I'm putting it right next to the refractor in the B tier. Now the Omochao gun. Remember Omochao from SA2, that guy who would occasionally give you helpful advice, but would later become a projectile weapon or someone that you carry throughout the stage just to piss him off when you were bored? Yeah, they made a gun out of him, and it's actually one of the best guns in the game. Should I put it in? No, I'm actually going to bump this gun up to the S tier. For one thing, it's the strongest non-explosive weapon in the game besides the Shadow rifle, dealing the equivalent of 5 homing attacks. And when fired, its bullets can bounce off walls and hit multiple enemies. Sometimes it can even hit the same enemy twice. You unlock it after beating one of the endings in Cosmic Fall, so theoretically, you can get it pretty early on in your playthrough, and until you beat the last story, it's a great substitute for the Shadow rifle. I just love it when I get a full hero or dark meter, and I can just unload on the enemies with this thing with unlimited ammo, and watching the projectiles bounce all over the place like a bunch of bouncy balls, it's just hilarious. Sometimes it even causes my game to lag a bit, and just like the Shadow rifle, it being an unlockable weapon means it's available in every stage, so I have no problem putting this weapon in the highest tier. Now let's move on to the rocket launchers, and these are weapons I'm a little mixed on. They're fun to use and they have their advantages, but overall I don't find myself using them all that often, and that's mainly because you have to aim them manually. Shadow the Hedgehog uses an automatic lock-on aim assist similar to GoldenEye, where when you fire, your weapon will automatically lock on to the closest enemy that's closest to the center of where you're facing. That's not the case with these weapons. These weapons have crosshairs that you have to aim with manually, which is sometimes helpful, but more often than not, trying to line your crosshairs on your target is a hassle. I also noticed that when you fire these weapons, they don't actually travel in a straight line, they travel in this arch-like shape, so they will drop off when they travel a certain distance, which is actually a nice touch of realism, and definitely something I wouldn't have expected in Shadow the Hedgehog. They also explode, obviously, which can be helpful since the explosions have a hitbox of their own, and it can actually be good for damaging enemies that block projectiles like the shield enemies and certain black oaks. Now, there's not a whole lot of difference between most of these, but I'll start with the most common one, the Egg Bazooka, which I'm gonna put in the B tier. I mean, it's your bog standard bazooka, what else do you want me to say? Unlike other Eggman weapons though, this one is actually on the more powerful side, doing 4 homing attacks worth of damage. It's also extremely common in Eggman levels. I personally find it to be the most useful in Iron Jungle's hero mission where you have to destroy the egg balloon. It's also really powerful in the enemy's hands too. I mean, egg pawns that use this thing like to spam it a lot, and for some reason, despite most enemies in this game having stormtrooper aim, the egg pawns are actually pretty accurate when firing these things. Overall, this isn't necessarily the best rocket launcher in this game, but it is probably the most useful, so I'm going to put it above the egg pistol in the B tier. Now, the human variant works almost exactly the same. They both have the same damage and same amount of ammo, but I would argue that there's less reason to use this one because gun enemies generally have better weapons available in stages that you'll find this weapon. It's still a decent rocket launcher that does have its uses, so it's gonna go in the same tier. I'm also going to do the same with the grenade launcher, which again functions almost exactly the same. I don't think I need to say much, but I will say that this weapon is more common in the flashback stages on the Ark, and the grenade launcher is actually very useful in Lost Impact against the artificial chaoses, because when you hit them, their parts separate, but the explosion will damage all of the parts at once, so a well-aimed shot from this gun can kill one of these things in one hit, and that's something that even the Shadow rifle can't do. Now we move on to the alien variants, starting with the Black Barrel. I was thinking C, but as cool as this thing looks and as cool as its crosshair looks, it's easily the worst of the rocket launchers because this gun is just so weak. Like, it deals the same amount of damage as the ring shot and the semi-auto rifle, which for a rocket launcher is pretty pathetic. It also has extremely short range, which I guess could be a good thing depending on how you look at it. It becomes even more deserving of its spot in D when you realize that in any stage you find this thing, you're also very likely to find the Big Barrel, which is exactly what this gun should have been. It's tied in power with the human and egg bazookas, and I think it also has the same range too, but I'm not 100% sure. Either way, it's going to go next to its cousins in the B tier. Now, there is one more weapon in this category, the tank cannon, and it pains me to put this weapon this low, but see, I really wish I could put this weapon higher because statistically, it's one of the best in the game. It's tied with another weapon that I'll get to later for being the strongest non-unlockable weapon in the game, and its blast radius is much larger than that of the other bazookas. It's comparable to Chaos Blast, but the problem is that this thing is only available behind locked doors. You know, those secret doors that require 5 keys to open, that usually require you to play through the stage multiple times and actively hunt them down for rewards that usually aren't even worth it? Yeah, doing that is the only way to get this thing, and it's only available in Prison Island, Iron Jungle, and Black Comet, so it is very possible to play through this game to completion and not know this weapon even exists. Its limited availability also means you have little to no reloads, so you better make sure not to waste what few shots you have. Also, apparently this weapon was planned to be a vehicle at some point, as is hinted by Eggman's dialogue in Iron Jungle. Now that would have been cool, but I guess it would have been difficult to design something like a tank and make it work for a platformer like Sonic. Oh, and I almost forgot one other weapon that is technically a rocket launcher, but not even really much of a weapon. The healing cannon. This thing fires projectiles that heal targets, and when they're healed, they become pacified. It may sound useless, but it's actually a really useful weapon because healing enemies gives you points toward whichever alignment the enemy is with, allowing you to get chaos control much earlier and much more often than you're supposed to be able to. And that's to say nothing of the glitch that lets you farm for hero points by killing enemies but then healing them before they despawn. The pacification is even helpful with really aggressive enemies like the gun beetles that you may not be trying to kill because you're trying to do their mission. It can also be an alternate way to heal the researchers in the Doom so you don't have to carry around those heavy healing pots. It's a very gimmicky weapon, but a good one, so I'm going to be putting it in A. I guess I'll get the weapons of the vacuum category out of the way, of which there's only one of, not counting the unlockable one. The main one is the vacuum pod, which is a weapon that can suck in rings and boxes and small enemies, and I mean, it's a neat idea, picking up enemies and sending them flying into their allies. Like, I suppose it's fun the first couple of times, but it's really just a less than ideal way to take down enemies. It's like you have to find ammo in the stage, and even then this thing has a limited number of uses. Not to mention, it's easy to accidentally suck in enemies that you may not be trying to kill. It's also necessary to do the hero mission in Central City, where you have to defuse 20 small bombs, which is actually one of my least favorite missions in the game. And don't even get me started on those parts in the Black Comet levels where you have to use them to extend walls. I'm only putting this thing in D because I actually think the design decisions made around this weapon actively make the game worse. Now, the other one like this, the egg vacuum, I'm actually going to put in C, because it pretty much works the same way as the vacuum pod, only when it sucks in enemies, they're gone for good. You can't spit them out or anything like that. You can just hold down the button and it will suck in everything it can. You can't spit them out, they all just get banished to the Shadow Realm, until you get to an enemy that you can't suck in, then you're screwed. It can still be used for all the secondary functions as the vacuum pod, like extending the walls and sucking in the small bombs, and one thing I noticed is that it's one of the few ways to actually kill gun soldiers, who you normally can't actually kill, just injure. But with this thing, nope, they are gone for good. I also like how this weapon gets bigger for every enemy you suck in, and once it runs out of uses, it explodes, which is a neat detail. And it also has 30 uses, which is more than the vacuum pod's 20, so not really a great weapon, but a fun one and still better than its younger brother. Oh, and I also feel like I have to mention that this weapon is a reference to Billy Hatcher, which I haven't actually played, but not many people have either, and I've heard it's underrated, and I'm always for drawing attention to underrated games. Alright, we're getting close to being done. Just one category left, the lock-on weapons category, and yeah, this is a category of weapons I generally avoid. Like, they're not bad weapons, but they're not really my choice of weapons either. What these things do is let you lock onto enemies with a laser, and then they'll launch a homing projectile at them, much like Gamma's gameplay in Sonic Adventure and the Met gameplay in Sonic Adventure 2. It's a neat idea, giving you a variety of different weapons that do this, while also bringing back elements of the Met gameplay from those games, while giving you the same speed and maneuverability as Shadow, but I just don't find these weapons all that good. For one thing, depending on which weapon you're using, you're limited on how many targets you can lock onto at once, and the bullets travel much slower. You also don't get that same feedback you did when you took out enemies this way in those games, and that's what made them so much fun in my opinion. Generally, I just find it better to shoot the enemies that are right in front of me than lock onto them and wait for a very slow traveling projectile to make contact with them. But I'll start with the RPG, which is easily the worst one. I mean, for one thing, it's tied with the basic worm shooter for being the weakest, but it's also not as common, and it can only lock onto one target at a time. Like, doesn't that kinda defeat the purpose of using one of these weapons? Yeah, you're going in D. The worm shooter functions similarly, as I just pointed out, but I'm putting this one a tier higher because, well, for one thing, it can lock onto 2 targets at once, but it's also extremely common. You get it from sandworms, which you'll see in nearly every level that black creatures appear in, so it's not a bad choice. I still wouldn't recommend it over most other Black Arms weapons, but if you really like the lock-on feature of these weapons that much, this isn't a bad choice for the early stages. Now, there are 2 more upgraded variants of the human RPG, the 4-shot RPG and the 8-shot RPG, which I'm going to put in their respective tiers above the regular RPG, the 4-shot in C and the 8-shot in B. These both function the same way, but they do a bit more damage. The RPG deals 3 homing attacks while both of these deal 4, and as their name suggests, they can lock onto more targets, but I don't think I've ever actually needed to or even been able to lock onto 8 enemies at once. Very rarely have I ever been able to lock onto more than 4, but there are still plenty of other reasons to use the 8-shot. For one thing, it comes with more ammo. In fact, it is actually more than possible to save up hundreds of rounds for this thing because it's more common, believe it or not. This is the weapon that hotshots drop in stages with gun robots, and it's also not uncommon to see gun troopers using this thing. The 4-shot is mostly used in the Heavy Dog and Blue Falcon boss fights, where they're dropped after dealing enough damage to the boss's turrets, so that's a plus for this thing. I should also mention that any weapon that allows you to lock onto more than one target also allows you to lock onto bigger enemies twice, which, even with that, still isn't enough to kill most stronger enemies with these weapons, but it will stagger them, which will allow you to line up another shot, which should kill it. There's also 2 more alien lock-on weapons, the Wide Worm Shooter and the Big Worm Shooter. The Wide Worm Shooter is like an upgrade of the Worm Shooter and an in-between of the 4 and 8-shot RPGs. It does the same amount of damage and allows you to lock onto 6 enemies at once. It's dropped by kill worms, which are kinda hard to distinguish from sandworms, but you will start seeing them closer to the end of the game, and it's not a bad weapon, so I'm gonna put this thing in B tier. Now, the Big Worm Shooter is a great weapon. It does have the same slow traveling projectiles as the other lock-on weapons, and it can only lock onto 2 targets at once, but it is the weapon I mentioned earlier that's tied with the tank cannon for being the strongest non-unlockable weapon in the game, dealing 8 homing attacks worth of damage. And that's enough to kill any enemy in the game in just 2 hits. And seeing as how it can lock onto the same enemy twice, it's basically just 1. It only comes with 6 rounds, but the death worms that you get this thing from are actually pretty common in later stages. So this is an easy contender for A tier, and honestly, I almost put it in S tier, but ultimately decided against it. And now there is one more weapon left, and it's another weapon that I want to like more and want to rank higher, but it's just not that good. It's the satellite laser, and while it technically is a lock-on weapon, unlike the others, it doesn't actually fire any projectiles. What it does is it brings down a laser on the enemies from above, the same kind you see in Westopolis. I mean, what's not cool about that? It's like the Hammer of Dawn from Gears of War, except this game came out before Gears of War. It's also the overall second most powerful weapon in the game, and it's the only lock-on weapon that actually creates an explosion. So why is it so low then? Why is it only in C? Well, for one thing, it takes a couple of seconds before it actually lands, and the explosion's radius isn't very big, which gives the enemies plenty of time to move out of the way. I mean, the Black Oaks are programmed to charge at you when you get close enough, and these are the kind of enemies that you're supposed to be using this weapon on, so, like, what's the point in having a lock-on weapon if it has a chance to miss? One thing that may be good or bad depending on how you look at it is that, unlike other weapons, it can't actually fire without a lock-on target, so if you press B and you can't get a target, you don't have to waste any ammo. It's another weapon that I want to love, but its poor implementation prevents me from putting it higher. And also, before I wrap things up, I'm going to make a small change. I'm actually going to bump the refractor up to the A tier, because it's not quite as powerful as the big worm shooter, but it's much more common, and as far as alien weapons are concerned, it is on the more powerful side. It also has an awesome sound effect, but to be perfectly honest, the main reason I didn't put it in A at first was because it just looks stupid. It looks like a... It looks like a bad dragon toy, okay? Please don't demonetize me. So yeah, these are my tier list rankings for the weapons in Shadow the Hedgehog. You are more than welcome to make your own. You can check out my tiermaker tier list in the description and make your own. And this is where I was going to end the video, but as a bonus, I'm also going to do a separate tier list for the vehicles in this game. And I'm just tackling this on this video as a bonus because, well, unlike the weapons, I actually do kind of agree with most people that vehicles in Shadow the Hedgehog are kind of useless. Notice how I said kind of, not completely useless. There are some levels that I think make good use of vehicles and implement the mechanic pretty well, but I'll discuss more of that as I go on. There also aren't as many vehicles as there are weapons in this game, so there will only be 5 tiers instead of 6, and I don't even know if I'm going to use them all. I'm also going to include turrets because they work in a similar way. Okay, let's start with the obvious, the iconic motorcycle, and I'm gonna put this in B. I feel like I'm obligated to give this thing a moderately high ranking. I mean, how can I not? They heavily showed it off in all the promotional material, they're including it in the new movie. The only reason it's not an A is because in the game it's not actually all that good, and it's only available in one stage, Lethal Highway, and it doesn't even look like it does in the promotional material. We wouldn't actually get a proper playable version of that thing until Sonic 06. Now, this kind of goes into the common complaint people have about vehicles in this game in general, and that's the fact that Shadow is just faster on his feet than in vehicles, but I don't think that makes them useless. For one thing, vehicles have their own health bars, so getting hit while in one doesn't cause you to lose rings, nor does it kill your momentum. You can also damage and usually kill enemies by running them over, which is just funny. And a perfect vehicle for that is the Armored Car, or HMMWV, which is also going to go in the B tier. This vehicle is about as fast as the other vehicles, but it controls much better than the others, which I will explain later. But it's also on here because it's generally placed well in places that it would be useful in. Like in Gun Fortress, as soon as you start, you can hop into one of these things and start running enemies over, while also blowing through the breakable doors that close on you. Although, shout out to the sadist Sonic team that decided to make one of these the reward for finding all the keys in Lost Impact. I can't even drive this thing more than a few meters. If I try to take it with me on the turret, the platform just slides under it. So I can't take it any further than this. Or can I? Wait, I just thought of something.
One eternity later.
Yes, we made it. We finally made it. We can now... Hold on. I think I'm gonna make it. Oh my god. In an HMMV, we made it past multiple turret sections to the bottom and to the goal ring. What did we accomplish with that? Absolutely nothing. Okay, now the air saucer, and I'm actually gonna put this thing in A. Not because it's the strongest or most powerful vehicle, but because I think this vehicle and all the segments designed around it are perfect examples of vehicle implementation done well in this game. This thing doesn't let you run over enemies, but it does give you almost complete control. Almost everything Shadow can do on foot, he can do in this thing, including jumping and grinding. You can even double jump, and while you can't go quite as fast, this vehicle does have a great way of building up momentum, and at max speed, you can go almost as fast as you can on your feet. But the reason this is the best vehicle in my opinion is because of the sections of levels that are designed around it. This thing lets you travel over certain hazards and death planes, like the Toxic River in Prison Island and the gas in Black Comet. In fact, it's even used as a key reward in Lava Shelter and Air Fleet, where you can go straight over the lava and grind over the electric rails. And in fact, the entirety of Air Fleet can be completed on one of these things. The only downside to this thing is that it has a bit of trouble going up slopes, but this is easily the best designed vehicle in this game. Now, I mentioned that this is the vehicle that's primarily used to cross hazards, but there is another stage that uses a different vehicle. That's the Jeep in Central City, along with the convertible. I think these things both are functionally identical, so they're both going in D. There are a few other stages where you can drive the Jeep, but it's mostly used to run people over, and you can also use the convertible in Lethal Highway, but like, why would you do that when the motorcycle is right there? Especially when that thing actually controls well, unlike these vehicles. Like, if you're going close to their max speed, which isn't even that fast by the way, they'll start hydroplaning. Like, what kind of crappy craftsmanship does Gun have if you could barely control these vehicles? I don't know if this was intentional or not, but no other vehicle in this game has this, and without it, they'd probably be in C, but because of it, they're even lower in D. Now, there are two more types of machine vehicles in Shadow the Hedgehog, both of which are gun walkers, and I'm going to start with the jump vehicle, which I wanted to put higher, no pun intended, but it's another case of good concept, bad execution. It's a walker that can jump really high, and it's required to maneuver certain parts of stages. And by stages, I mean only Sky Troops and Iron Jungle. I mean, it's fun to use, being able to jump crazy high and all, but you can pretty much only use it in parts of the stage where the game wants you to. Once it's time to move on to the next section, that's it. I even tried jumping over to the next part, but it didn't work. I should mention that it has this gliding ability, but you have almost no horizontal movement while doing it, so I'm not even sure what the point of it is. I'm going to put this thing in C. Now the other vehicle, the cannon vehicle, is going to go in B. This one is pretty much the same vehicle, but it can't jump as high, but it does have a built-in machine gun that is functionally identical to the heavy machine gun. Only it has unlimited ammo, so if you're willing to sacrifice speed for some extra firepower, this is a great choice, and you'll be able to get much more use out of it too. Now that's it for machine vehicles, but there are actually two more things that function like vehicles, the Black Hawk and the Black Volt. Every now and then the game will require you to hop on one of these things and it'll send you on an on-rails flight through the stage, and I think these sections are well done and quite fun. There's even a stage designed entirely around this, and it's actually a pretty cool stage. The Black Volt I'm putting in A since it has a built-in homing projectile, while the Black Hawk you have to use your own weapon, so it's going in B tier, but other than that they're pretty much the same. Now that's it for drivable and flyable vehicles, but I did say I was going to include turrets, so I'm going to be ranking those two in this list. I'll start with the turrets in Lost Impact, which I'm actually gonna put in A. Not only because they're the most powerful, but I actually think they were implemented pretty well. Dividing the stage into sections that are connected with what's basically a shooting gallery minigame was a nice change of pace. If only this level didn't have that stupid and confusing hero mission, then it would be a contender for one of the best stages in the game. The heavy machine gun turret, this one I'm gonna put under it in B. I mean, it basically just allows you to go into a first-person perspective with the M60, which is nice, and in fact it actually breaks the fight against the Egg Breaker after Iron Jungle. And then there are also the shooting gallery sections in Circus Park, but trying to do this is usually more effort than it's worth. You can also break them to get a carryable M60 though, which is helpful. Now, the alien turret functions nothing like this. This one instead shoots black barrel projectiles, and you get a black barrel from destroying it, which isn't as good, but I will say, this one is going in the same tier purely because of how it's implemented in Sky Troops. You can use this weapon to shoot down Eggman's battleships, and it even plays like a minigame where you can blow up its cannons to prevent it from firing, and then block incoming projectiles by shooting at them. You can shoot down the battleships with normal weapons, but this is really how the game wants you to do it. You know, even though Gun Fortress is my personal favorite stage, I have to say, Sky Troops is probably the best designed, and it's a close second, and this is one of many reasons. And, yeah, that's it. Wow, I was right, we didn't even put anything in the E tier, so yeah, those are my vehicle rankings. I'm gonna have a separate link for this tier list down below in the description as well. So yeah, those are my weapon and vehicle tier lists for Shadow the Hedgehog. I want to give you guys a big thank you for watching. Be sure to check out my other links in the description. I'm going to show my Blue Sky profile since I want to start being more active on there, so be sure to follow me there. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe, and until the next video, I will see you all later.